So today we are going to be covering, I know I don't look as handsome as Garrett, but you're gonna have to look at me this month. We all love Garrett's art history lectures, but we also wanna start peppering in some Skillshare in a way. And so one thing that I find that a lot of people, a lot of artists struggle with or are not really sure how to approach this in an affordable way and not making too big of a deal out of it is taking pictures of your artwork and working with digital images. Because a lot of times with submissions, a lot of times with submitting to galleries, they want very specific parameters for your digital pictures. So what we want to do is have confidence and be prepared so that if a call for entry comes up, we feel like we have everything ready to go and we just kind of submit it. I talk about this a lot in my Everything But the Paint webinar that I have recorded on the ARA site, but it is a lot of just being prepared and having things ready like your resume, having things like your artist statement written. This is a plug for next month with Hester doing a Writing for Artists talk for our monthly talk. So make sure you look on the website to sign up for that if you're interested in writing artist statements and different writing that goes along with being a creative. So obviously we all like to just be able to paint, but the reality is that as an artist, you also have to kind of be an entrepreneur and have to play a lot of different roles and wear a lot of different hats. And one of them is kind of a digital photographer and also your own IT person. So that's going to be what we cover a little bit today. And so this is going to be recorded, and as you all know, and I'm going to hopefully be able to share some strategies I use with just my basic iPhone, but also my DSLR. And our lovely editing person is going to plop that all together for you, as he does every month. Okay, and if you have questions throughout the process, I don't mind interruptions. I will repeat the question out loud just so the audience can hear it. And then and also our Zoom friends here can hear it. And I will do my best to answer questions. And then we'll also have maybe a pop quiz at the end. So we'll see. Yeah. Okay, so one of the questions I got in advance was, should I take photographs of my artwork before it's varnished or after it's varnished? And the answer is after it's varnished. Now, that's with a little asterisk on it, because let's say you don't necessarily want to varnish yet, but the painting has been dry for quite a long time. You don't have to use varnish to resaturate your colors. So a lot of times we talk about oiling in and varnishing as a way to resaturate our colors and values to make it look the way it did when the paint was wet and it was freshly painted. A way to get around that and not having to put the varnish on is also using mineral spirits. Again, you have to make sure that the painting is totally dry. If the painting is totally dry and you're comfortable enough taking some mineral spirits, you're able to refresh those colors, refresh that paint, and you can take a picture you've got about a 20-minute window. Okay, so the nice thing about that is mineral spirits evaporate, so will not leave a film on your surface. If you use linseed oil or any other type of oil, it will leave that surface covered in oil, and that oil will yellow over time, and so we don't want that. The mineral spirits will fully evaporate, so those solvents will evaporate. They don't leave anything on the surface. Okay, so I say varnish first. I just always say it's just easier just to varnish it and then take the picture. But if you, for some reason, you don't want to varnish right away or you don't want to varnish at that time, for whatever reason, you can just use mineral spirits. I would definitely use odorless mineral spirits like Gamsol because it's the weakest solvent that you can use. Okay, you don't want to be using a very, maybe a turpentine or a naphtha solvent. Those are a little bit more aggressive. So I like to use the weakest stuff possible for my painting. So you have about a 20-minute window before that fully evaporates to take a picture. Any questions about that? Okay, so I would say varnish or solvent to refresh those colors. Now, the image I have over here on the right, the painting has already been varnished, so we're gonna pretend that I just finished that and varnished it and it's all lovely. The most common issues you're gonna have when you're taking pictures of your artwork, the #1 problem I hear about is glare, okay? And we'll actually see that in action up here as well. Another additional problem we have is that the painting or the picture doesn't look like the painting. So we have color correction or values, or everything looks way too compressed. And so that would be color correction and white balance and black balance. Okay, so we're going to talk about those things today, and hopefully you'll feel confident in tackling those. So the first thing to do is help out your camera. I hate to break it to you, but photographs are lies. They are lies, lies, lies. So photographs are not reality. They will not give you reality. They are an interpretation or a translation of reality, okay? So what we're trying to do is take this interpretation, and our goal is going to be getting the biggest and best picture we can with this lying machine. Okay, so in order to make the lie less lie-y or obnoxious, there's a couple things we can do that's going to help out the camera identify and make better decisions. So just like I'm here to help you guys make better decisions when you're painting, you're helping your camera make better decisions when it's taking a picture. So how can we do that? The first way that we can do that is white balance, okay? So white balance is a way for your camera to understand what's happening in the scene. And when we get into the camera real time, I'll try to show you this in real time, but if you look at the two different images, which is one with my camera on my painting without a key, and so those of you who are painting or drawing with us know what a key is. It's an extreme, a light or a dark. In this case, the white, the camera looks for the brightest values and wants to kind of bring it to white. So if you only have yellow in the scene, it's going to try to make that white. So you can see how it kind of shifts everything accordingly. So the minute I start putting a white paper in the scene, the camera adjusts. Okay, so that adjustment is changing the white balance. It's telling the camera to do a few different things instead, because it has new information and it sees this very bright value and it's pure white, and it's going to make a better decision. Okay, so I often try to put, when I'm taking pictures, a piece of paper in the scene so that it has something to white balance with. Okay. And again, we'll try to do this in real time with our camera. We'll see if that works. Yes, question. Good question. So the question is, do I put the white right in front of it, or do I put the white near it? So usually if I'm taking a picture of a painting, I'm actually going to be putting, let's say I have, like we do over here with the painting in front of an easel, I'll put the white piece of paper kind of right behind the painting on the easel. So it's kind of up near the top, and it's just in the scene. So it's not actually in front. Again, if you're using, there's different things you can use to take pictures. There's DSLR and an iPhone or whatever. In different things, you have more control over them. But when I'm doing it down and dirty, I just kind of throw a piece of paper in the scene, or I give myself something white in the scene that's just going to help it for later on. Okay? Yep. So just by adding something white, it's going to help. It'll also help you in post-processing, because after you take that digital picture and you bring it into your computer, you have something in the scene that you know should be reading as somewhat neutral or white. So it also helps in post-processing. Okay, two different pictures. This might look familiar to some of you. So the picture on the left, this was taken up in the lunchroom. Okay, so if you take a look at the picture on the left, I took a picture of my banana that I had for lunch, and I did not include the white of the whiteboard. And you can see how much different and how different that color of that wall reads when I don't have anything white in the scene. Okay, it's just kind of making a guess at it. But by having the whiteboard section in there, you can see that the colors read a little bit more natural to what you guys are used to seeing in real life up there. Okay, that makes sense to everybody? So I just want you to see the difference. This is super casual. This was with my iPhone in the lunchroom, but it really does make a pretty big difference. So this is an example of what my painting actually looks like. And I could, you can kind of get the sense for it. But you can see here when I'm taking the picture of the painting, I not only have the white piece of paper in there, the white for white balance, but I also try to get something really black in there too. Okay, you can also buy a more formal photography color chart that you can kind of calibrate your camera with. That is fancy. I am not fancy. So I just want it down and dirty and I want it to work. And I just, what's the fastest, easiest way that I can do this? And I try to have something bright white in the scene, and I try to have something relatively dark or black in the scene. So even just the background underneath my easel, that's pretty black. And it's gonna allow the camera to kind of pull the extremes to those points. And then everything else should be kind of like in the middle to some degree. So I'm not blowing anything out. I'm not trying to compress the darks in my painting to full black. I'm trying to give the camera the best amount of information to for its own compression. It depends. It depends. So the question is, when you have a black object in a shadow, that's the darkest thing you're going to get. So that's why I like to have, if I'm going to have something black in the scene, it's kind of a natural shadow, maybe on something dark. Okay, and that's because I want I want the camera to understand the full range of reality versus what my painting is. Okay, and so if I have a black on my painting, it is not going to be as dark as a black shadow on a black object in reality. Paint is paint. It's light hitting a black surface. So if you have a black piece of fabric in light versus a black piece of fabric in shadow, it should be more black in the shadow. Right? Does that make sense? So because my painting is a painting in which light is hitting it and then coming to my eyes, even if it's black paint that's absorbing a lot of that light, it's not going to be as dark as a black object in black shadow in reality.
Which is hard to imagine because that is really black.
It is, but you notice the shadow from the cast shadow of the frame onto the painting. That's black. Okay? Right, yeah. Exactly. Okay, does that make sense? So I like to at least make sure I have those extremes in my scene. It just helps. It's not 100% necessary. I can work around it, but it's a little bit harder to work around it. Misha, did you have a question?
So you might have addressed this, but for what purposes or in what contexts would you have, for example, your painting on an easel rather than just a shot of your painting?
So in order for me to take a picture of the painting, I have to put it someplace to take a picture.
And then you crop it?
Yeah. Yep, so I'm cropping it. So in order for me to take a picture, I don't I could hang it on a wall, but if it's just on the panel and not in a frame, how am I going to hang it on the wall? I'm going to put it on an easel. I just need it on a perpendicular surface. So I want to make sure that what I'm looking at and how it's going to be photographed and how it's going to be lit, I want it to look the same way. So I tend to photograph on an easel. Right? I don't do it face down. I could, but my studio is set up so that I have easels and I have lights on the easels, and it's how it was painted. And it's just a natural progression for me to photograph it that way too.
I have a question regarding the easel. With the easel being warm, do you find that affects how the camera reads the warmth in your picture?
Yes. So the question was, my easel or the wood behind the painting is warm. Does that affect the way the camera reads the painting? Yes. Because if I didn't have that white paper behind it, and I didn't have a big group of white in that painting, it would be trying to make the wood whiter. So then you're changing.
Does it show to have the warmth of that easel?
I don't think it necessarily totally matters. So the question was, does that warmth, do you want warmth behind it? I just want to make sure somewhere in the camera scene, there is something relatively white and relatively black. Now again, you can get a fancy color card, which kind of helps your camera calibrate extreme reds, extreme blues, extreme pinks. I'm lazy. I just throw a piece of paper in there and make sure that there's a dark shadow. Exactly. Like there's a good enough I'm a big fan of good enough. But then there's perfection. You could absolutely go down the rabbit hole, and I'll show you going down the rabbit hole, but it also is time consuming, expensive, but you get amazing results. But I think you can get good enough results with a little bit of MacGyvering. That would be great. That'd probably be way smarter. That'd probably be way smarter. So the suggestion was, well, what if you did like a neutral gray background and then something white in the scene and something black in the scene? Yeah. Yeah, that probably would be smarter.
That goes to the whole by the little.
Yeah, so it's kind of like similar to the key thing. Like you can take additional steps. This is kind of like the bare minimum, I would say. Yeah. If you don't have a gray background, this is just wood. Wood is relatively low chroma. I wouldn't recommend taking pictures on red. Red is super irritating to photograph. But yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend extremes, but wood is relatively low chroma. That's why our palette tends to be wood toned or gray or neutral. So that's where, just having something that's not extreme, but having the extreme values helps the camera to kind of understand. I will also put a big asterisk on everything I'm saying. I'm not a professional photographer. I'm sure there are better ways to do this, but I'm just helping you with the things that work for me that are easy and cheap. That's my priority. I am easy and cheap. So, yeah. So, I mean, a lot of this I built from the ground up because I don't know my digital camera exceptionally well. I have not invested that amount of time into understanding digital photography, which would be helpful, but it's also very time consuming and requires a lot of effort. And I do a lot of that towards my painting. So this is, I found, short of just paying somebody else to do it, which is also just as valid. There are plenty of fine art companies that will scan your paintings. There are people who have other ways of doing this, and you can also pay somebody else to do it. That's also great because then you don't have to do it. But if you're trying to do this on a budget, if you're trying to be able to do this quickly and easily, this is kind of my mode of doing things. And so, anything like adding neutrals to the background is probably going to be helpful. But again, there's a certain amount of effort you're willing to put into things. Okay. All right. Any questions about that? It's just giving yourself the best options for taking the best pictures of your work. Okay. The dreaded glare. So again, up in our lunchroom, everybody was kind of milling around behind me. Everybody was having lunch, and you can see I took this picture. This drawing has glass in front of it, so it's going to naturally have excessive amounts of glare. So in a standard room, so what do you see in this reflection? You see me. You see, I think that might be Daphne in the background. You see the chair. You see the bookshelf in the background. You see the brick from the opposing wall. There's just light everywhere in that room. So that's what you're seeing as glare in that picture. Okay. In a standard room, there's windows, overhead lights, lamps, clothing, light walls, etc. So all of those are sources of light. They might not be direct, actual glowing orbs of light, but the only reason we see anything is because light is bouncing off of it. While you guys are kind of dark right now, I still see you because light is bouncing off of you and then into my eyeballs, et cetera, et cetera. So you literally just have light bouncing everywhere. And that is what's causing glare. So glare is just light, including bounced light, bouncing directly off the varnish or the glass into the camera lens. Okay, this is the ideal lighting situation to take a nice picture of your painting. This is ideal. This also requires money and space, none of which I have. So having two lights with diffusers on them or bounced light into the situation. You want it to have 30-degree angles from either side. You need to have a lot of space. You need to have a big room with nothing else in it and no lights on. A large empty space with nothing else in the room, and then this color card. So that's the color card I was talking about. And you have to have some good intimate knowledge of your DSLR camera and everything you're using. I don't have any of those things. Okay, so this is the ideal lighting situation. in order to prevent glare. But we're gonna do it a little bit in reality. Okay, so we live in reality lighting. And this is, I'm gonna say this is for reasonably sized work. If you're going on the size of maybe John's painting, that massive kind of wall size painting, that's a whole different story. I'm talking stuff that's reasonably sized. And I would say reasonably sized is probably 4 foot by 4 foot and under. I think you could reasonably take a decent picture of something that's 4 foot or less in height or width with either an iPhone or a DSLR. 1 or 2 clamp lights or LED panels. I do have links if people are interested in knowing what type of lighting we tend to use here. I'd say 1 or 2 clamp lights or LED panels. You need a room that you can turn off all the other lights in the room and close all the windows and close any window shades. Okay, you need black clothing. We wear black clothing, not just because we're cool, but but because it actually does service a purpose. If I am wearing a red shirt, why do we see that it's red? It's red because it's bouncing red light into our eyeballs and it's an extreme color. So the minute I get up close to my painting, you've probably seen your red shirt reflecting off your paint surface. So it's kind of distracting. You're like, oh, wait a minute, my red shirt's bouncing in there. Wearing black, it's going to absorb more of the light. So it's not going to reflect into your wet paint, and it's also not going to reflect into your varnish or off the glass. Okay, a tripod. Tripods are not expensive, people. Get a tripod. Everybody should have a tripod. You can get a cheap like $10 tripod and just get a phone holder or like just get a cheap tripod for your DSLR if that's what you're going to use. A tripod just makes things a lot easier. You're not going to get blurry photographs. It's just going to be a good thing to do. And then your white and black paper just to have in the scene if you're going to do that. So this is more like reality. And you can see here, I usually have an easel and the light source. We're trying to look for roughly 30 to 40 degrees. Do I use measurement tools for that? No. I just move things around. And I'll do that with the camera. You'll see that happening. Okay, so I just want to show you the difference here between these two pictures. The only thing I did was I turned off the lights in that back half of the room. And notice the difference. There were still people back there. The bookshelf is still back there. The brick wall is still back there. But just by turning off the light in that back half of the room, most of the stuff went away. You can still see me with my iPhone there, but that's because I'm sitting there bathed in light right in front of the glass. Okay, good question. Erin asked, do I ever use a polarized lens? No, because I have no idea how to use them. I'll be honest. I hear a lot of recommendations, use polarized light and a polarized lens. I'm sure it probably helps. I don't know how to use it. I've never bought one. Maybe I could just use my sunglasses because those are polarized. I don't know, possibly. I haven't had time to look into it. But anyways, I don't use one. It might help. I haven't really had a need for it because I'm just making sure I'm controlling the light. So I do think it does help with bounced light. I do know that if you look into water and there's light bouncing up at you, the polarized sunglasses helps you see into the water. So if there is bounced light, maybe that would help. Yeah. But I don't think that's going to help if you actually have, again, I might be totally wrong and I'm going to get reamed out over the internet. But if you have original light source bouncing into the varnish, I don't know if that's necessarily going to totally get rid of that. If you do some experiments, let me know. Okay. All right. So that's just a difference of making it dark in the room. So there's kind of the danger zone. I did take these images off of somebody else's blog post about this, but you can kind of see how there are those two bright lights that you can actually see them being reflected. And that's because this is what they're calling, or I'm calling, the danger zone, that yellow circle, where the light's going to be able to hit the surface and then go back directly into the camera lens. So we want to try to avoid that danger zone. like, yeah, so any light source that's kind of like right behind the camera and about, you know, again, there's numbers related to it. I just like move things around until it doesn't do it. And then so you can see here that these lights are further outside the danger zone. Okay. Yeah, in the danger zone, out of the danger zone. In the danger zone, out of the danger zone. Okay, but you do see that there is still some, like, there's a brightness that's kind of right in the center and it's a little bit dimmer on either side. Sometimes those things are unavoidable. We can deal with those things in post-processing after we like just get the best picture we can out of reality. In, out, in, out. Okay, this is my cue to switch to the iPhone. Okay, so here is my iPhone. So I'm gonna scoot over here, Erin, so I don't wanna like knock you over here. Just be careful of my... All right, so this is my iPhone. Now we'll go over like phone settings, stuff like that, camera settings, but I just wanna play with the danger zone. Okay, the first thing I wanna do is I'm gonna turn on the overhead lights because I want you to see how much glare that causes. Okay, so you can see that from my angle right now, when I look at that painting, it doesn't look too bad, but where my camera is, where my phone camera is, what I'm seeing is light from that light source coming here and then coming directly into there. I want to avoid that. I also have this light up here, and then I was going to just show you where some additional danger zones are. Okay, so this is from right behind. So we're like almost getting a mirror. Okay, so we're almost getting a mirror. So if I start going over this way, it starts to go away and it starts to go away. So I could light it from the side. That's what that guy was showing or the other person was showing on that thing. So this is outside the danger zone. It's outside. What was that? Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, so right now we just have, let's see. So the light source is kind of exactly, the clamp light we currently have is directly above. Not directly above, I would say it's at 35 degrees, I would say. You can still see a little glare, which sometimes happens, okay? So, but I just wanted to also play with more extreme danger zones. Okay, so this is obviously horrible. Okay, this is literally light going bing, bing, right back in and then back out. Okay, so you can start, this is where I just play with things to make sure that I'm not getting the danger zone glare in it. Okay, so that's a little bit more obvious. But here I have more of a situation that is similar to what I have in my studio, which is this is kind of the angle that I have my light at when I'm actually painting. I don't like to have glare when I'm painting. Now the problem is you can start to see up here, there's still some glare, right? So, and that's just because of the angle. So normally I normally actually have my light a little bit more forward and a little bit more straight down. But in this instance, I can still avoid that. And the way that I'm going to do that, this is very similar to the way that I'll photograph my own paintings when I'm trying to do it quickly or I don't have something that's too huge, is I usually use an LED panel because it's a little bit more of a wide, even distribution of light rather than a flood or a light bulb, which is kind of a hot spot of a cone. Okay, so those floodlights tend to be really bright in the center and a little bit dimmer around the edge. So just keep that in mind. So if I'm going to do just a flood light bulb, I might do 2 of them, again, at those angles. So you saw in the danger zone image, the lights were kind of from the sides. You could also do it from the top and the bottom. Okay, so one way that you could do it is, we'll talk about that glare in a second, but another way you could do it is actually also light from below if you wanted extra light on it. So notice that we're doing that same 2 angles, but instead of doing them side to side like the other person did, you could also do it top to bottom and not get glare. Exactly. Okay, so we have this glare up here, and I don't want to photograph that. So one way that I can avoid that is lowering my painting. So then I'm changing the angle at which that light is actually, it's not hitting here anymore. That light is kind of going overhead and I'm not getting as direct. Now, if I lowered this too, it would come back. If I lowered this a lot, you can start to see it happening more, right? So sometimes what I'll do is I say, oh, look, no glare. I like that. So I might tilt it a little bit. A little bit of tilting is not a big deal because I can fix that in post-production. I can change that a little bit after the fact. So a lot of times I'll actually be, usually when I'm painting, my painting's at more of an eye level. So I'm not getting glare. If I'm painting like this, it's a very good chance I'm going to get glare because my light source is coming from above at a slight angle. If I'm looking up, it's almost a perfect 90-degree angle. So I always paint where it's at eye level so I'm not in danger of getting glare. And that's what's happening here as well, is it's at a little bit of an angle down, so I'm not getting that glare anymore.
So do you move your, depending, say you're working at the bottom of the painting, so you move that up?
Oh, absolutely. I almost don't care what it looks like up there because I'm working in the lower section. So I don't have to worry about seeing the whole thing all together. If it's a very tall painting, I'll want to get back anyways to see it all holistically. But when I'm working in a space, I just want to avoid glare. And to do that, I'm just making sure it's not that angle of light, the angle, I think it's called angle of incidence. That light source is coming in, going to bounce off that surface, and I believe be a symmetrical bounce off. So if it's 0, it's going to come right back at me. What'd you say?
The normal angle.
Yeah, the normal angle, whatever that means.
So, well, say often when you're painting, you want there to be equivalence. You want the object and your canvas to be sort of like side by side so that you can.
For drawing, okay, so the question was, do you normally like to have here, when we're working on Barg's cast or still life, we tend to have the drawing and or painting lining up with the subject. And that's because it aids in drawing. But once I have a good feel for the drawing, especially those larger proportions and larger information, I almost don't even care anymore if it's perfectly lined up because it's done its job. I don't have to have it lined up the whole time because it's still a 1-to-1. It's still like the same size. But to have it lined up anymore isn't really necessary because I've taken care of all the drawing information and the drawing is already solid at that point. That's the point at which I don't care about it moving up and down. Okay, so but we're just assuming that we've finished painting and we're trying to take this picture of our artwork. So there are times that with my camera or my DSLR where I'll slightly angle it down because I just want to lower this. Okay, and I can lower this even more if I need to. It all depends on your lighting situation at home. This is a single light source. I'm not using any other lights on this painting right now. Okay, but the nice thing is we have this kind of mostly dark room behind us. I'm wearing dark. Now I also want to show you the difference of if I was wearing a white shirt doing this. So notice how you can kind of see the white shirt, the white dancing around there. Can you see that on the screen? Yeah, so that's what's happened if I'm wearing a white shirt and I'm back here trying to take a picture. Okay, so where you should be wearing black or have a cloak. If you want your picture taking cloak, but if you're taking pictures that day, just wear all black. But if you're wearing white, you're going to end up getting some glare. Okay, and so I'm also way up here. So if I'm even moving around, sometimes you're even going to see some of like your arm, right? So one thing you can actually do is get further back and do the zoom in instead. So then you're less likely to be like bouncing light in because you're further back and zoomed in. You're all, this is the dance I do when I'm varnishing. No, when I'm taking pictures. Yeah, so this is, the zoom in is also better because you get less distortion. When I'm taking reference pictures of still lives, or if I'm taking reference pictures of people, I will zoom in as much as possible and use that, because the closer I get, the more distortion I'm gonna get. I don't know if you can, my iPhone actually has like a change distortion thing, but you can see that little bit of distortion happening. But you can avoid that by zooming, by pulling back and zooming in more. You're going to avoid distortion.
I don't really get what that is. Is it like the lens?
Yeah, think like fisheye. Yeah, like fisheye lens. Like the closer you are to the edges of the camera, you're right. I'll make sure my camera guy confirms this.
You know, your oculars in the figure room without changing the perspective. But if
Right.
you were to walk up close to the model, now it's this huge.
Very good point, Alex. Okay, so using the binoculars stops you from getting the distortion as if you walked up close to somebody. So actually, we talk about this too in the cast rooms, where if you're standing too close to your sight-size drawing, there will be a fisheye distortion, because not only are you seeing the cast like 3 feet away right in front of you, but now you're seeing the top plane of the base it's on. So you're actually going to be drawing almost like a fisheye perspective. And that's why with sight size, we make sure that you're at least, I think it's like 3 or 6, what is it, Garrett? I think it's like 6 times the tallest or widest dimension.
Yeah, it's like 6 times like the highest.
Just make sure you're far back. Let's just say. Yeah, it's rough. We usually do about like 6 feet back, 6 to 8 feet back, just for the average cast size. But the further back you are, the less distortion you're likely to have, because everything, we talk about everything fits in that dinner plate size, that inside your peripheral vision. So it's kind of the same thing with the camera, correct? Where if you're kind of on the outer edges, you're going to get that fisheye. So the more you kind of zoom in with it. So my DSLR camera has like a zoom, and I try to get the furthest zoomed in and the furthest back. So that way it's going to have the least amount of distortion. Okay, it also keeps me from being reflected in the varnish surface. Exactly. Okay, so are there questions about the lighting part, about trying to avoid glare and the best way to do that? So I know glare is one of the things that most people had asked about in the preliminary questions, but that's kind of how I avoid glare. It's dark room, dark clothes, zoom in, furthest back you can be. Make sure that if your light source is really low, it's okay to have a lower light source. Just know that you might want to drop the actual height of your painting and angle down a little bit, or just actually take the picture at a slightly lower height. Okay, and sometimes it just takes playing around with your camera and seeing if there's an angle at which you get like more glare than the other glare. So let's see, my assumption is that we'd get glare over here because of that wall. Yeah, so that wall over there is pretty bright. That wall over there on the left. So I'm kind of making this extreme, but you're seeing that angle over here with my white paper dancing up and down. So you are getting like a little bit of glare. So it does require you to sometimes say like, oh, sometimes I'll see this in my own studio where I have the light on in the elevator lobby and I'm like, I'm getting weird glare. I have to go in and turn that light off too. So it's really about controlling the light in the room while you're taking the picture. And notice I didn't need the white thing in here because I actually have a white, my actual chicken is white. Okay. Now we're gonna travel back to the, yes, question.
Like when there's photographers that are like using natural light, you've never used natural light.
Good question. So natural light. So the question was, a lot of photographers will use natural light. I also have had people say, oh, just take the picture outside on a cloudy day. Like that will give you nice, even diffused light. But there's also a crap ton of light objects outside that bounce light into it. So I used to try to do this under a porch. So I would say that if you had a self-contained porch with light on 2 windows, so it's, yes, that can help, but I actually think you're outside, so you're gonna have so many more light sources than in a dark room. If you have really heavy blacks, you're gonna wanna be inside in a dark room with 1 or 2 light sources that you absolutely can control. Okay? Plus you can take photographs at night.
So you mentioned, oh, I don't need a white sheet of paper
Yeah.
because I have my white bird,
Yeah.
right? So you're only talking about using that white piece of paper when you don't really have whites in your painting. Is that what you're?
Pretty much. Okay, so the question was, I mentioned that I didn't really need the white piece of paper in this situation because I have whites in the painting. They're pretty dominant whites. So if I had a really bright painting that was like pretty heavy with some pure whites in there, I don't necessarily feel like I would need them because the camera already has that aid. It has context within the actual picture plane. And so the reason that I don't always love doing that with the blacks as well is because of what we talked about before, whereas black in real life is the absence of light. But black on my painting is not the absence of light, it's just the darkest value I'm capable of. So I like to, at least with the blacks, if I can get that extra help in, but with the whites, the white surface being reflected. Now it'd be also different if I had a physical light source in the camera, right? So I wonder if we can mimic that. If we put, yeah, here, give me your flashlight. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so I was gonna see like if we actually had a light source in here. See how that blue light changed the temperature of that chicken to yellow?
It's trying to fit everything into the range that it has.
Yeah, it's a robot trying to make decisions about compression.
But do you feel, when I look at what you have up there right now, the whites are blown out to blue?
That is also the projector. So if you saw this on my phone right now, which it might actually be interpreted better on the video as well, is that this, let's see if I can zoom in even more. So I don't know if you can see on my phone here that you can actually see the difference between the specular highlights but on the projector is just kind of garbage. So sorry about that. Okay, I also wanted to show you guys the difference between how those blacks are reading and how the greens are reading if I introduce white.
Yeah, that's pretty dramatic.
So you see how without the white it overexposes and those blacks start to look a little gray. The introduction of the white drops the compression so that the blacks read a lot darker and then everything kind of shifts a little bit accordingly.
You're also just showing off your ability to paint fonts.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yes, question?
The question was the
Sorry.
difference between
I got distracted.
might know.
Digital versus
It says
analog, like actual film.
Yeah.
Chris, let's ask the cameraman.
Yeah, much like what you're talking about white balance is that actual film uses like silver or like crystals to make the picture. So you need to have the film that's specifically balanced for the type of light that you're using, whether it's like warm light or cool light.
Much more complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And you have to like develop it to see. With digital, you can just take 100 different pictures.
Sure.
I just wonder if it
Yeah.
would be truer to life if you have all of those variables in place. I don't know exactly. I mean, I'm not a photographer.
Same.
But I've heard so many
Same.
people talk about analog images
Is it
being,
better?
like the quality being so much better. But I don't.
Maybe that's just
You also have, if you are an experienced photographer, you also have a lot more control with the things I'm talking about.
yeah.
So like there are people who have such competency with even digital photography and like the cameras themselves, where a lot of the problems I'm talking about are probably not that big of a deal to solve. But again, I don't necessarily have the time to go down that rabbit hole. It's kind of like making frames. I learned I don't want to make frames. I just want to pay somebody else to do them. So that's where it's like paying somebody else to scan your. So this is a very good point. Is I actually used to pay somebody to scan my paintings, no matter how big they were, and it was to me affordable. And then when I started just taking a test of like, here's what they gave me, and here's what I was able to do with my DSLR. I liked my colors better. I felt like they were truer to the painting, and I actually felt like the resolution was actually a little bit better. So that was kind of a big deal for me. If I have large paintings, physically large paintings, yes, I'm gonna have like somebody else scan them or photograph them. But for reasonably sized work, I'm gonna do it. Okay. Okay, so that, I kind of showed you the difference of like putting the white paper in there. You got to play around to see what's working for you and in your situation. Any questions about the glare stuff? Okay, so now that we've kind of dealt with the actual how to take the best pictures, I also want to do a little bit of information about. John helped me with the images for this. So there are two major types of file formats that I want you to be familiar with. One of them is RAW, and RAW file formats are fabulous because they, first I'll start with JPEG. So JPEG is typically the file format that most competitions, gallery, anybody that you're sending images to, magazines, they're going to want a JPEG. That is pretty much the standard digital file format for most places that you as artists are going to have to work with. So a JPEG is basically a compressed image file. It's easy to use, anybody can use it, magazines can use it, graphic designers can use it. JPEG's kind of the universal baseline. But when you're taking the picture, but when you think about JPEG, think of it as like the McDonald's hamburger. You get what you get. You can dress it up, you can put more extra pickles on it, you could put more ketchup on it, you can take off the lettuce, you can dip it in barbecue sauce, but it's just the McDonald's hamburger. Okay, so it is compressed, and it's, it is what it is. The nice thing is that the file size is very reasonable. It's the most common file type, and but the camera settings, you're committed. You're committed to what you're done. Get it? That's it. You're done. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff with Photoshop, but that's it. So what I actually used to do was I would set up my camera and I would take multiple pictures at different exposures. And then I would try to marry some of them together if I felt like my brights looked good in one picture, my darks looked better in a different picture. As long as I was on a tripod, I could kind of mash them together. That was really annoying, but it worked. And then I got more comfortable with the RAW file format. So RAW file formats are uncompressed and processed image data captured by the sensors. So that means it's like taking a whole bunch of data and information, and it's this kind of like ether cloud of information that you get to still make changes after the fact. So you can change exposure level, you can change focus. There's a lot of things you can change and before you've committed to that flat image. So you think of it as like these this cloud of possibilities in one file.
Questions.
There must be like the threshold for all of those possibilities before your image starts looking like crispy.
Called a big ass file?
Yeah, it's a big ass file. It's a big ass file. So it is yes, it is physically a bigger file. But there is a limit to what that data is. It's not infinite. So you're kind of creating, you're capturing a range of information. Okay, and also this is how I understand it. It might not be technically correct. So big files, big ass files, and there's a lot of options before you commit to something. And it's kind of like ordering a burger at a gourmet restaurant where you get to choose if it's medium rare, well done, before it comes out to you, rather than McDonald's is like you get what you get. Okay, so raw is better because it's more information and you can make adjustments before you've committed to the flat file. So the question was, do iPhones naturally take raw pictures? As an ant, so that's gonna be a little bit more challenging, but we'll see. I don't know much about the Android devices, so that's where maybe if somebody else knows a little bit more about them. Okay, so I just want you to know the difference between the different file types. One is a flattened thing, one has possibilities open before you've committed to it.
I like your analog description.
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, I also have a DSLR. You can pick this option in a DSLR. So whenever I take a picture, it takes two formats, my flattened JPEG and a raw picture. So there are two file formats every single time I take a picture, and I'll show you kind of files that look like that. So I don't know a ton about how DSLRs work, but I found that these settings work, so I took a picture of them. So I could come back to, if you find a group of settings that works for your space, just take a picture to always remind you. So I tend to use manual. That's the second 1/8, I believe, is the exposure. I'm checking it with my cameraman. The shutter, it's the shutter. All I know is it makes things lighter or darker. It's the shutter speed. Oh, this is shutter speed. It's how quick, how fast it, how long it stays open, and then, yeah, okay. It's a good thing I'm giving a talk about this. Shutter speed is, I just know that as I toggle it back and forth, things get lighter, the bigger the number, and darker the lower the number, because it's the lower the number, the faster it moves, less light gets in there. I always keep it at f5.0. I don't know what that means. I just keep it there. ISO is something to take into account. So ISO, you want that number to be low if possible. Okay, low means have you ever seen pictures where the darks get noisy? It kind of looks like you can see these little vibration pixels. So the higher the what are you laughing at, John? No, noisy. The higher the ISO, the more noise that's going to be in those darks, but it does make the photos brighter. The lower those numbers, the less noisy things are, but the darker it is. So you have to kind of play with those two things in your situation to see what works out. All I know is that these are the settings that work for me, but I definitely always make sure that the file format that I am using is RAW and the biggest picture. So it gives me a JPEG and the RAW file. Okay. So I have a Camera Rebel, and the raw file format is a .cr2. The one on my phone is a little bit different. So this is what I use for DSLR. Now, if this is for an iPhone, okay, so for an iPhone, if you want to have, this is for, I don't know what, I have an iPhone 15. I don't know when raw, I know. Can thank my parents for that. So the iPhone 15, I don't know what versions before this have this option, but if you do have the option, if you go under camera, and then you go under this, I don't want to trip here, this formats, and then you want to turn this on, because this gives you Pro RAW and resolution control. This is my settings for my camera. So this is like under my settings. Okay, so I'm going under formats in my iPhone. And then I go to I want to turn on the option to have Pro RAW and resolution control. Would it make sense for me to try to put that up on the screen on my phone?
Yes, do it.
Okay. In my settings, if you have an iPhone, you can play along. In my settings, there is the camera app, camera settings. So in camera settings, I go to formats. Now I like to use most compatible. I don't love the high efficiency. I want the most compatible file formats when I take pictures. I don't really, the whole high efficiency thing annoys me. But for photo mode, I think I just put it on the high. I don't know why you'd take a lower resolution, but this Pro RAW resolution control is what you should toggle on. So if I click on Pro Default, I could say a JPEG Max, I don't know what that is, Pro RAW, which is 12 megapixels, or the Pro RAW Max, which is up to 48 megapixels. 48. Okay, here's the thing. Don't keep this on all the time. Because every single one of your pictures is going to be 48 megapixels. But so you can keep it on in here. But when you go to your camera, what I want you to notice up here in this right-hand corner, upper right, you see where it says RAW Max up at the top there? Okay. There's a little line through it. That means it's off. That means I'm taking normal pictures. I'm not taking 48 megapixel pictures. Okay. This is just taking good, nice, good pictures. But if I want to go raw, if I want to go, that sounded very weird. If I want to go raw, if I want that raw burger, then I'm going to turn that on, and then I'm going to take a picture. Yep, and then I'm going to turn it off so I don't just keep taking 48 megapixel images. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah. All right. If you have an iPhone, it's good to always have that as an option, because if you're out in the world and you want to take a nice reference picture, go raw.
Go raw. Mega. Raw.
Go mega raw. Okay, so that's how you would turn it on your iPhone. If you have an iPhone and you have that capability. The iPhone 15, it's up in that corner. It might be a little bit different, but just having the option and taking the biggest, highest resolution possible.
It will go at least to the 48 or whatever it was. This one only, the 13 goes at 12.
Right, so you'll take the 12 megapixel, which is still pretty good. A 12 megapixel picture is pretty freaking huge, right? It's pretty solid, pretty good. Pretty good. Okay, all right, so yeah.
Pretty much the exact
On
same.
Android, it's similar.
It's pretty much the same thing. They just have a button on the side in your camera app that allows you to go to the Pro.
Okay, so there is an option on Android. If you are in your camera app, there's a button.
It says more.
It says more. So click on more.
Which is great. I love how Android does
Yep.
that. And it gives you options for like all different types of photos, sort of portrait, raw, or pro.
Okay. Pro raw. Yeah. We're raw and we're professional. Okay. Right? Yeah, exactly. Okay. So that's how you're going to take you're going to take the highest resolution picture with your phone. No glare, highest resolution picture. Again, everything we're doing is trying to get the biggest picture, best picture out of our cameras.
The comparison between that and the nice camera, the DSLR.
Yes. How do they compare? We can try that out. So let's take a raw picture. Let's take a raw picture here.
Yep.
So, Julie, when you said
Yeah.
that you used to take your paintings to someone to scan,
Yeah.
do you think that you had a better eye for what you were looking for your final product because of the fact that you're the artist and you
Yes.
right?
Yeah, so the reason I feel like I liked what I got out of my camera versus what happened when somebody else scanned it, I'm very sensitive to color correcting because I know what that painting should look like. So when I would get the files back, they were good and they were pretty decent, they were good resolution, but I always felt like it didn't necessarily really feel like maybe I just wanted it slightly cooler so it felt like more like in real life, or maybe the darks all looked a little too compressed for me, right? So that's where I'm just really picky about that. Okay, so now I need to take a picture of, well, let's see what my presentation was doing. I'll also take a picture with my DSLR. So that's what we just did here. And then, okay, so let me take a picture with my DSLR. I should have it. I should be using a tripod for this, but I left it upstairs. I think I can take a pretty decent. Yeah, like I usually do. I act like the tripod. Could I stop breathing? Make sure you take the cap off. So what I also like about this camera is, so I just turn it on. It also has this thing where you get to preview. You can preview it, and there's actually a touch to take the picture, and I like that because if I'm on a tripod, I just touch it, and then it thinks for a second, and it takes the picture. So it's not going to get me touching the camera. Okay, so again, I'm going to try to zoom in as much as I can, and this looks really dark. I don't know if you can see that right here. So if I just take this picture as is, it's pretty dark. I don't love that. So I need to go to my settings. Right now it's at 1/25. So 1/25 is a very small number, meaning it's very dark. So if I make the fraction larger, which is a lower number on the bottom, math, important, it'll let more light in. Or I could change the ISO. So to toggle that shutter speed to be longer, so it's going to be a little bit fuzzier if I'm doing this. Let's see if I can. So you see how much longer that stayed open? That stayed open a lot longer because that number was higher. So it's possible I might get some movement. So the other option I can do is change the ISO, which is, again, let's see, my ISO. I'm going to change it to a little bit higher. So I'm making it 800 now because I just know a higher number means it's going to look lighter. And it does, and that means I probably don't. I can make it a faster shutter speed. Yeah, now it's like 1/25. And now it's back down to 1/25, which was too dark before. Chris is probably like tortured by this because he's like, oh my God, you noobs. Give me the camera, right? Okay, and I always like zoom up in to make sure it doesn't look fuzzy. I think that looks pretty good. I think I can deal with that. Okay. My ISO, that was 800, and my shutter speed was 1/25. So we can compare these two. Oh shoot, how am I gonna get it on there? I think I have the key. It's in the container. Okay. Okay, so now we have the JPEGs. Yes, we have them. Oh, let me make sure you put the cap back on so you don't scratch the lens. Okay. Okay, sorry, Jessica, that you couldn't see that, but you'll see it in the recording. Okay, so opening a RAW file, I'll show you what happens when we do that. This is kind of all the stuff that I do to like make the file good. What time is it right now? 7. Okay, we might need to make this a 2-part series because there's a lot more to do. But let's just okay. So let's just kind of open those two, get those onto our computer right now. Okay, so there's 2 ways to get your if you have one of these. If you have one of these, I'm assuming you kind of already know how to get it from your camera, but there's a couple of ways. One is just to have a cable, and then this one also just has a little card in it. And I just happen to have a card reader plugged in because it's also how I'm connected to the projector right now. Okay, so there's a lot of pictures on there. I'm just going to grab the last 2. So you can see that this is a CR2. This has a CR2 and this is a JPEG. So this is the image flattened. And then this does have like more information in it. Okay, so I'm just putting those 2 on my desktop. They're over here. And then I'm gonna do the same with my phone, because I took those same pictures on. So this is a .dng file. That's the raw for Apple. I don't know what it is for. So again, I just know that it is a raw file, and it's almost 20 megabytes. So that's good. Okay, so this is what the iPhone gave me, and this is what my DSLR gave me. Now, they're very different settings. They both had different information kind of put into them. So what we want to do is see how we're going to open them. So if the JPEG is just a flat file. Like I can't change anything about the exposure. I can't change anything about, it is what it is. It's the McDonald's. It's the McDonald's hamburger. You can't change. I can bring it into Photoshop and change things, but I'm actually changing the pixels. I'm changing the pixels when I change things in Photoshop. But if I use a raw file, I have options to make the pixels what I want them to be before they get committed to that, to being what they are.
It's a stem cell.
It's a stem cell. That is a great analogy, John. It's a stem cell for pictures. Okay, so I'm going to open them in Photoshop because that is the program that I use to adjust my images, is Photoshop. Okay, so I'm just going to open, they're on my desktop. So I'm going to open the phone one. So it's a .dng. I'm opening my phone one. So now notice that before it opened, it actually gives me a lot of things I can change before I actually open it. So this file isn't opened yet. I'm in the stem cell lab. Okay, so I'm in the stem cell lab at the moment, and it is going to look a little bit funkier on the thing. But I have all of these things I can change about it before it goes to my actual Photoshop and makes it a flat image. Okay, so what I want you to notice up here in the upper right hand corner is this histogram. Okay, so this is saying that this is basically like a graph. Okay, and this graph right here is showing me that there's a lot of stuff in the darks, there's some stuff in the middle, and then there's some peaks in the lights. Okay, and when you hover over these things, they say blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights, and whites. So if let's say I like this, so I'm looking at it on the actual screen, and I can see that this is kind of blown out right here. It's not really easy for me to see those highlights. So what I'm going to try to do is say, all right, well, I'm going to play with what was the brightest whites are called whites, and then the next one down are highlights. I can bring down just the highlights. Notice how that created contrast with my brightest whites are still poppy, but I'm able to now see that contrast between the brightest whites and the next value down. Okay, so I'm fine tuning, and you see what happened up here. So I'm gonna change it. Look what happens to that histogram. It kind of dropped the values of those next values down. Like it allowed my brights to be my pure brights. There's a limit to what you can do. You can't make whites whiter. You guys are familiar with this with painting. You can't make whites whiter. You're literally losing information. You can see that happening when you start blowing out. It starts blowing out. We've lost the information. So the only thing that we can do to make the whites look even brighter at a certain point is to take the next group of values and darken them a little bit. I'm making my highlights are about as bright as they can get. I'm trying to bring that next group down to give it that value jump. Now, what I could also do is bring everything down and then bring my whites up. I am not destroying anything about this picture because it has not been flattened yet. All this information is still in the ether of stem cells. I've not destroyed anything yet. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. We're still playing. We're still kind of swimming in the ether of information. Okay. So, but the problem is with that exposure is, but if I just keep dropping that exposure more, I'm going to start losing all this information. So I have to be careful, and I'm trying to wait out my knowledge of this painting with what's possible. So I'll play around with this a little bit.
Right. Is there a certain point at which you don't feel like you can get any more information out of your photos, your paintings?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, number one is you're limited by the settings that you took the picture at, right? So if I took it all way too dark, there's no way I can get it up to a certain point. Like there's going to be a range because I'm using the raw, but there's also a max at that range as possible.
Do you feel like your photos of your paintings are, if not, do you feel like all of them are leaving out a little bit of information because they're removed in this digital format? Because paintings and their photos are, they can look very different in real life.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we all have experienced this where we're in a museum or we see a painting in real life, and they never totally live up to the experience of real life. Part of it is because when you're dealing with oil paint, the complexity of light bouncing around in that surface and bouncing around in between layers is a huge difference to the flattened pixels that you get with a digital image. So you're always going to be losing some information. And you're not going to be able to, and a lot of times, like when you're trying to deal with like getting those specular highlights, some of you have seen where I use like impasto to try to amplify the brightness of a highlight, because I'm actually trying to get it to be a specular highlight from a light source onto the oil paint film. You can't really get that to come across very well in a painting. Impasto, when you have the texture of impasto that kind of breaks up and creates an additional lighter area because of all the light catching on those ridges, it's really hard to mimic that in a picture.
So I guess that brings me to a different question. Is if you have a painting with a lot of impasto, what would you do to? Would you try to highlight those ridges in reality, or would you? I
think it would require a lot of like, I'd probably do a couple layers of manipulation. I'd probably take the best picture I could given that information. I would also try to like possibly use like if there's a lot of like texture in it that's catching light where I don't want it to, I'll go in and like remove some of those specular highlights that I don't want, but maybe leave some of the ones that I do want. Like that's where you're gonna have, it's very different when you're working with very textured paintings. Most of my work isn't severely textured, and where I'm doing impasto, I am intending it for it to be excessively bright and white. So that's, beneficial for me, but like it's just challenging.
So it's all about your paint film, the surface that you're taking a photo.
Yeah. And you're doing the best you can. With extreme chroma, especially like this red cloth, you can even see, I mean, it's a little bit more extreme on here, but even if you saw this on the screen, this is extremely more chromatic than what the relationship is in real life. And that's just because cameras don't handle extreme chroma red very well. And so I can modify that in here. Like if I feel like the saturation is way too crazy, I can adjust it here. I can adjust temperature. Right, exactly. And it's actually severely blown out here. So a lot of times when I've been messing with these things, I might need to bring the saturation down a little bit. So these are the things that, like, the fact that I can play with this stuff before committing to them is really powerful, because it gives me so many options before I've committed to the image as it is. So a lot of times when I'm taking pictures like this, I tend to be, cameras tend to compress the darks and blow out the light. So a lot of times I'll be trying to take those extremes and kind of bring them in a little bit more compressed. So kind of like what we're doing here. I might bring the shadows up just like a little bit. So now this is also taking into account that I have a whole scene. I also have the background here, which is dark room in the background with that is a shadow. So I don't want to take into account that back here is black. But I want to make sure that this is reading black in here, right? So you can up the contrast, you can drop the contrast. So the light is most of the stuff I tend to work with. Again, I just play around with this until I feel like it's a little bit more in tune with what I note that I see in real life. I'm also trying to make sure that this seems logical to me, or if there's like a big gap someplace. So here I'm actually clicking and dragging, so I can actually change things just by clicking and dragging in that histogram, or you can be using these, what do you call it? Toggles, thank you. Okay, so again, color mixer, you can even take the reds and, you know, drop the reds a little bit. You can drop only the reds. You know, so there you go. Okay, so let's say, okay, I'm happy with that. Let's just see what that looks like. I'm just gonna say, okay, we're good. Open. So now that it's in Photoshop, this is flat. This is one layer. I can still add filters to this, but I've committed to those things. The filter will change the pixels. What we did up to that point was we kind of like felt out different options, exposure levels, color mixing. We felt out what we wanted in that ether, and then we collapsed it into a single flat image, and those pixels are what those pixels are. So if I put a filter on it, it's going to change that pixel. If I if I put a filter on the whole thing, if I put a filter on a little section, or if I just take take the paintbrush and paint over a section, I'm painting onto this flat file. Okay, Photoshop gives me layers in which I can do things on top of things and not destroy that original flat layer, but you can't go back in now on this picture and change things. I can reopen the original raw file and do it again and make a different file. Does that make sense? So here, this picture, this file, once I save that out as a JPEG, that's the pixels. So we've mostly avoided glare with what we've done, and that's like really the big deal. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna save this I'm gonna save a copy because I don't wanna get rid of my raw meat. So I'm gonna save it to the desktop as like the iPhone pic.
Yeah. Which varnish do you use?
I like to use Conservar Regal Res for varnish. It's a soft, weak varnish, which I like because I can remove it. Okay, so now I can also save this, which I believe will save those settings, but I prefer to keep at least one file that's totally just raw. Like I don't want to mess with it at all. So I'm not going to save that. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to go open the camera, the Rebel, Canon Rebel CR2. So I'm going to have those same exact options pop up. Okay, and so you can see how I definitely am way darker. My settings gave me a way darker version of this, and I've like lost a lot of information in here. It's really, really quiet, which I'm like, I don't know if I love that. So this is where I'd probably start by just trying to open up the exposure a little bit. So if I can start to get some of that back. And you can kind of see what's happening on the histogram. Those brights are starting to push up towards that endpoint there, but I'm able, you see how it's kind of starting to clip? See that little red thing happens here? It's starting to clip. So I want to bring the exposure up before that happens. And so then I'm starting to be able to see some stuff in there. That's nice. And then I'm going to play with maybe I just need to like bring my shadows up a little bit. See that? Nope, that's my whites. Let's try my shadows. So you see how that's not doing anything to the lights? It's just moving my shadows up. And then my blacks, I can go even dark. I can go darker with my severe blacks. So now I'm getting a difference between here and here. Like that's good. I need that. I'm having this is like slightly visible. Actually on the computer, it's a lot more visible. You don't want to like, change. You don't want to lie. That's a good point. You don't want to lie about your painting. What I'm trying to do is make sure that it is true to what I see and what I painted. Another kind of interesting thing about this with the color is like when you drop down to the color, you see this little white balance tool. If I theoretically click on what should be white, so you have to be careful about it because It's aggressive. So you can see this little eye, this is what it is without it, that's with it. So this little eye will show you that's with the filter, that's with the color off, that's with the color on.
It does tend to pull the temperature towards cool when you do that.
Well, because I touched on what was white. I touched on, okay, so if I was saying, oh, this needs to be white. That should be white, or like if the red.
What
Right.
about something else in the light area of the rooster, but not.
So I just picked this area. So it's gonna do color balance there. So here I'm color balancing to what should be pure white, and it does, depending on the situation, it may be like way off. But usually I find if you have something pure white in your painting and you click on it, it usually gives you a really good or a really close temperature, which now when you hide this, you can see how much more yellow that looks. My painting is a lot more, actually, let's turn on that light to see if we can see the difference, to see which one we think we like better. All right, so that's the actual painting.
The light is warm.
It's your monitor. So what are we seeing versus your?
What's reality?
Well, that's what is reality. This is our challenge. Our challenge as a painter is what is reality. Are we trying to make a reality? We take a picture of our painting and we're trying to just make sure that it feels, I like it with it on. I think that the temperature of the other objects read better, and the chicken looks less yellow. But we can also take that and split the difference, right? So I can shift this tint a little bit. Maybe it's just making it too cool, and I can shift this tint a little bit. Right, so just those little tweaks, and this is before I've flattened it, right? I haven't destroyed anything.
But you've done all these changes, and if you sent this out to somebody for a competition, or
Mhm.
what they're getting on the monitor may not be what you.
Okay, so that is the challenge of our world. Yeah, so their monitor is a whole different story. You have no control over that. All you have control over is you making the best picture you can with the monitor you have and what you're seeing. That's a very good point. I do also try to make sure that my brightness on my monitor is kind of in a midpoint, because if I'm doing it all with my monitor screaming, do you see a difference there? No. But on my laptop you can see. Yeah, Shay.
I would say that I was told this a while ago, and I think it's still true, is that you should always color correct your photos for Macs more than PCs, because that's usually what they're going to be viewing all of your work on.
Okay, our cameraman is nodding his head, so so try to color correct on a Mac, or if you have like Mac.
And then also, like, all digital printing is going to be done through Macs.
Okay, so if you can color correct for a Mac screen to some degree.
And there are settings in PCs and non-Mac products that allow you to do that, because they do have slightly different range.
Okay.
Like,
That's something I just learned. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because Macs with graphic designers tend to use Macs.
it's a standard
and, yeah,
across
it's a
the
standard
industry,
across-
so most
yeah.
people are viewing all of your work on a Mac.
It's also because Mac, it's like one company, whereas PC, you can get monitors from like a billion different companies.
Asus.
And yeah. And if you want to spend $2,000 on a color accurate monitor, that's awesome. That's better than a Mac.
Good for
but,
you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good advice, I guess, to try to, if you have a Mac, you're already kind of set. So color correcting on your monitor. You're trying to do the least common denominator.
Photoshop does have an option for color correcting for PC versus Mac, and you can go up into the options and change that.
Okay, so if you are on a PC, check the options in Photoshop to turn that option on. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so that's where, okay, so we've got all these options. Again, we have that same thing. We get these nice dark shadows in the background. I still have some kind of speckly stuff going on in general with the dust and scratches, but that's always the case. And then I'm gonna bring my contrast down. That looks like very dramatic. Anyways, okay. I go there. Okay, so let's just say I'm going to open that. And then I'm going to file, save this as, so we can kind of compare what the two look. I'm going to just save this as a JPEG. This will be the DSLR pic. Okay, so this is the DSLR pic, and then we have the phone pic. Oh, let me turn off this light so you can see it a little bit better. So they do both look really different. I also didn't put a ton of effort into color correcting them, and I also didn't have a tripod. But I also want to check out the file sizes. Okay, so the file size on the JPEG from the iPhone pic was 4.2 megabytes, which is a pretty good resolution. Like 4.2 megabytes. That's not bad. That's a pretty big file. I'd be happy with that as a high-res picture for the most part. It's 4,000 by 3,000 pixels, 300 DPI. But I just also want to show you that the DSLR pic is 13 megabytes. That's very high res. Okay, so if you're gonna go for, if you want like magazine quality, possible cover of a magazine, definitely go DSLR. I think you just have more fine-tuned control, but you can do it with an iPhone. It is possible. You can get a decent enough picture if you're able to refine the raw file and crop it in. You should be fine to get like a good resolution, way more than you need for your website, which would be a lower resolution. Okay, so the super basic information about now that we have digital images is understanding that digital pictures are just little dots of information. And the biggest thing that we want to do is once we have our flattened JPEGs, they're the highest, biggest, best pictures that we have. Now we have to figure out how to actually change the size, change the resolution, all that type of stuff. But what you need to care about is that your digital picture is a bunch of little pixels of different colors. And you don't want the computer to make up more information. Okay, so your picture should always go from your biggest, highest resolution. And if you're going to change the size, it should stay equal or smaller. You don't want to start making the picture bigger and having it invent information, because that's when you get pixelated pictures. Okay, so you want to prevent the computer from making up some of those dots. You should start with your biggest, best original file size. Save that. Don't change that. Always make a copy. Always, always make a copy. Don't modify your original best, biggest, best picture. Okay? Be very specific about your file names. Yes. So always make sure you reserve and never change. Always make a copy of your biggest, best color corrected picture. Okay. File sizes I always recommend to have on hand is 300 DPI, which is high res. That's for print. And then the lowest resolution you should have is 72 DPI, which is for the web, is for screens. Okay, 72 DPI. Okay. And then naming recommendations, it just helps for you to, and this is where you'd also say, you know, highest resolution or best do not change, make a copy. Like put that in the file name if you have. Okay, just the super basics about that. Those of you who are painters, thinking about our paint film. So we have our paint films, our little particles of paint in a layer, right? So if we can take that same little glob of paint and spread it over a wide space, and it's just a thin layer of paint, right? We haven't added more paint or removed any paint. We can just spread it really thin. That's what happens when we can take those pixels and just spread them apart. We don't have to change them or add anything. We just make them thinner, or we compress them into this little pile of paint, and it's the same number of paint particles. Okay, the same way that we think about paint particles is the same way I want you to be thinking about pixels, digital pixels, whether they're further apart, same number, or same number close together, same number of pixels. Okay? And make sure you use enough paint. Thank you. So if we took that, these penguins, you can see if they're all the same size, but we're using lower resolution, there's gonna be literally less pixels in this low res one. Okay, so we're talking about these hypothetical situations. So let's walk through that, the submission. We wanna make sure that we have a JPEG that is 72 dpi and at least 1,000 pixels on the shortest side. So first, let's just open one of these and see what the file size looks like. We'll take our DSLR pic. Okay, I'm just going to say that I'm just going to crop this down and pretend this is like our nice picture. Okay, so this is our DSLR pic. This is the pic we're going to be submitting. I'm going to say, make a copy. This is high res. Okay, so that should be, you see where that says that? Make a copy. This is high res. So what I can do, if I open it, this is just preview. If you have a Mac, preview is really all you need. Okay, so this is my highest res picture. I don't want to change this. I want to duplicate it. I want to make a copy. So the first thing I'm going to do, oh, I hate that this is so, I'm going to get a different picture because I hate that this is ugly. I don't want it all, it's not. Okay, so I'll just show you an example. I keep all of my stuff organized. I'll just go into, this is my high res picture. Okay, notice I called it high res. The gravity she holds, high res. Okay, so I want to make a copy of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is go File, Duplicate. And then I'm going to close my original. Okay, the other thing you can do is when you're in here, you can click on the file, I believe, and you can also duplicate the file.
Okay.
So notice it just made a copy. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that one. And I'm just going to open up this one that I just made. You guys all got how I made that. I just made a duplicate. So I'm going to open up the duplicate. Now, how do we change the size of this? I know it's high res. I don't know how big it is. I don't know the pixel dimensions, anything like that. Go under Tools, and where it says Adjust Size. Okay, then this window pops up. Now, it says the width is 10 inches, the height is 17.96 inches, and the resolution is 255 pixels per inch. The resulting size, right now it's at 100% because that's the file I started with. It's 100% of what I started with. And the file size is 4.5 megabytes. Okay, in this little drop down right here, you can also look at the pixels. So this is 2,550 pixels wide and 4,579 pixels tall. So what's going to happen if I change the resolution to 255 pixels per inch? So think of little containers that are square inches, and I have 255 pixels in here. And I change this to only wanting 72 of them in here. But I'm keeping the same number of pixels.
It's gonna get smaller. Oh.
It's actually gonna get bigger. The file size won't change because it doesn't matter how I distribute those pixels.
Yeah, okay. What do you
I-
think is file size? What's the file
The number
size?
of pixels. The number of pixels. So let's say you have 100 by 100 pixels. 100 by 100. If I have 100 pixels by 100 pixels and I smash them into 1 square inch,
That's gonna be more high res.
so it's going to be higher resolution. But if I take those same 100 pixels, I haven't invented any information, I haven't taken it away, but I just spread them apart further. File size will be the same, but it's going to be lower of those pixels per square inch. So you'll still get the same data. It's just like a glaze rather than an opaque. So notice that my file size has not changed at all, but let's go back to what it looks. My file size is 4.5 megabytes right now.
Okay.
Okay. It doesn't matter if I make this 300, it's still 4.5 megabytes. It doesn't matter if I make this 72. It's still 4.5 megabytes because it's the same number of pixels. But what I want you to see the difference is the size of what I did. This, not the file size, the physical size. So inches at 72 DPI, same number of pixels. This is now 35 inches wide.
Final.
35, I could make a 35 inch by 6, I could make a 5 foot high, not print, because print is 300 DPI. On a screen, I could have a screen that's 5 foot high that this could be, yeah, it'd be a lot of scrolling. It's a lot of scrolling, yeah, exactly. So really what I want you to care about more than the physical size, I want you to care about the number of pixels by number of pixels, because that's really what you're starting with is what you don't want to make up more of. Okay, so changing the resolution also changed the size, the physical size. Does that make sense? So I didn't make up any information. I just either spread those pixels further apart, or I mashed them closer together, just like our paint particles. I haven't added any paint or decreased any paint. Okay, so with the pixels, what were the requirements for our?
At least 1,000.
At least 1,000. So this would work.
Less than 2 megabytes.
Okay, well that's a problem because we currently have 4.5 megabytes. So, okay, so it's at least 1,000. So if I need to make this file size smaller, I just need to get rid of some of these pixels. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to say, do we have a resolution?
I didn't write it down. I think you might have said 300, but I'm not sure.
I would say, let's just keep it at 272 for now. So if I'm just going to get rid of some pixels because I need to make that file size smaller. So I'm just going to get rid of some pixels. So I'm going to bring this down to 1,500 rather than 2,500. Now notice before I've committed to anything, it already tells me my resulting file size at 72 dpi is now 20 inches by 37 inches, and my new file size is going to be 1.5 megabytes, roughly. I think there's like some wiggle room there. So theoretically, if I say okay to this, it's now changed the physical size. And if I go back to adjust the size and see what it says, I'm at 1,500, and supposedly I should be at 1.5 megabytes. And there we go. I'm under 2 megabytes. And I can see here the dimensions are 1,500, which I put in there. Okay, it does the physical size, I think, is what gets people all confused. Yeah. It's more about pixels by pixels. We want to keep those pixels. Now, here, watch what happens here. So if I open that up again and I zoom up, it still looks pretty good. It still looks pretty good. This would be, you know, this is even higher res than I need for like my website. But watch what happens if I start making up pixels. So I'm going to open that up again. I'm going to adjust the size, but this time, this is at 100%. I'm going to make this 4,000 pixels. It's making it 300% of what it originally is. That means it's making 2 times more information than what actually it started with.
But what's the physical size?
So it's going to start getting crunchy at a higher resolution than if I were to look at the original file at that same resolution. You're going to want to get the highest resolution, the most number of pixels by pixels. You want them for those detail shots. And that's where if I want detail shots, I'm going to take my highest res picture and I'll usually take a screenshot of that. Yeah. Just because, I mean, I could also like make a copy, crop it, save that as a new picture. make a copy, crop that. It's just easier to just do screenshot, screenshot, screenshot if you're doing detail pics. So you never want to increase past what the original pixel quantity was. You want to try to max the number of pixels while staying in the number of. I needed enough pixels that I can see it clearly on my screen. And when I upload to my website, I don't want people to have to wait for 2 megabytes to download from the internet every time they try to access my website. So whenever I have, I always have web resolution. So this painting right here, or this picture, is only 500 pixels wide. It's tiny. The file size is 211 kilobytes. There's an applause from the back. Kilobytes for the web is great. And you can see here on here, it says that this is only 500 pixels by 1,000 pixels tall. I never do anything over 1,000 pixels on my website because number one, I don't want people downloading my images and then printing them on things and then selling them. So I don't want stuff to be able to be printed. I don't want it to be high res. The only people I want to have access to my high res stuff are magazine people, gallery people, and myself. Okay, I know the resolution thing can be confusing, and that's why I mostly wanted to do this talk actually. But so that's where if you just stay organized, which is have folders for each of your paintings, always keep the raw meat, keep the raw files keep them in the freezer. And then always duplicate your image. And you always just want to make sure that, so you can see here my resolution for this one, this is high res. This resolution is 300 DPI. It's 2,700 pixels by 2,700. It's 5 megabytes. That's good luggage right there. That's, you want me to open this? Okay. Okay. So that's like, you can get in and get familiar with those details. You can see the weave of the canvas. You can see all those little, look at that turquoise. Yep. Yep. Yeah, so that's great. Like, it's good to have, but there's no reason for me to have this on my website. It'll load really slowly. But the thing, always just duplicate. If you, for some reason, so when you go to this adjust size, which I think PCs have a similar program like this, and it's just about the actual physical size, unless somebody says, and there are galleries or there are submissions I've seen that says like, make sure it's no bigger than 5 inches, or if the magazine is like, it should be at least 5 inches on one side. They're gonna give you a couple parameters, and this is how you're gonna play around with those parameters. And then when you're done with it, save it as the copy, and then change the file name to whatever you're submitting to, or because they usually have naming conventions.
When you change the width to 1,000,
Yeah.
the height changes.
So do you see this little lock right here?
Yeah.
That means that it'll change it in proportion. So if you unclick that lock, you're gonna smash.
Okay. You don't want
No smash. We don't want to smash the burgers. Right, exactly. Okay, does that make sense to everybody about using, so this stuff is like, I always have scale proportionally clicked on. I think this is where if you unclick it, you see it looks unlocked, it's unlocked and you can smash it. Scale proportionally means you want it to scale proportionally. Resampling image is checked on. That is for, I believe, if you're making it bigger than when you started. I don't really know what that does, to be honest with you. Okay. So that sort of concludes, I know we got a little chaotic because I started to run out of time. But does that help? I did have file sizes where I was like, or I had files I wanted to show you guys the difference between things, but I don't know where I put it. Stuff for class. I swear it was stuff for classes. What? Yeah, I know. I mean, we're pretty much done. Yeah. No, I swear I had stuff. Okay. Digital images. There they are. Okay. What was I going to show you? Oh, these were the different images, blah, blah, blah. This is raw versus JPEG. So you can see the difference here between, this was the same painting taken with raw, And then this was it taken with a JPEG. You can see the compression just feels more sophisticated with being able to adjust it.
It's just more information.
It feels less compressed. You can just see that it's more elaborate in the greens. It would just be like the way that the information was interpreted was less, there was less assumptions made, I guess we could say. The JPEGs kind of have all these assumptions and are made automatically, whereas I went in and fine-tuned with that raw and then brought it to a JPEG. So you can see that I had more control and the subtleties were more apparent with the raw than with the JPEG. But really, it's like, just get the highest res picture. That's hard enough. Save the highest res picture. Don't change it. Make a copy. And then when you need to make lower resolution versions, decide what the limitations are, what the parameters of what the submission wants you to do, and then make a copy using those parameters and play with that. And you can always like zoom in to see if like things are going well or if they're getting too compressed. Or always don't be afraid to ask questions about like, okay, so you said you want this, but I'm not sure what resolution you need. Because a lot of times they'll say 5 inches on the shortest side, but that actually doesn't tell me anything. Because 5 inches on the shortest side, 72 dpi is very different than 5 inches, 300 dpi. So if you need clarification, not everybody's clear about what they want for submissions. So ask questions if you're not 100% sure. Okay? Okay.
Thank you so much, Julie.
We will see you next month for Hester's.